words, but mostly this is we're going to go into more universal principles of spiritual care. So that was the first one. It was very secular, that definition. It was, a peer-reviewed article. This one is more from a Christian background. This defining the ministry of presence is a favorite phrase of chaplains to describe how they work with or without words, to be the vehicle of God's love when they enter the room of a dying patient.
Can you read it from here rather than because you're bad?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Ministry of presence is a favorite phrase of chaplains to describe how they work with or without words. To be the vehicle of God's love when they enter the room of a dying patient, the cell of a prisoner, the cubicle of an employee, or the foxhole of a frightened soldier. Francis of Assisi expressed it well when he said, "Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words." So a lot of people think we walk into patients' rooms and we talk, but a lot of times there aren't really the words to find. That's why presence is such a powerful thing. I can tell you I've been in, and Dean has also been in emergency rooms, trauma bays, and there really isn't much you could say when people are going through that much difficulty.
Yeah. Well, there's something about physical presence that I'm very sensitive to parlors, people's parlors, and people's. I did a science project on ESP, grade, junior high, and I kind of believe that it's much easier to communicate even silently with body language, with people's stories. I just sense that there's anger, desire, fear, love, those things are much more easily sensed in physical presence than they are, say, on Zoom.
Yeah. Yes.
Any meetings on Zoom, forget it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us got burnt out.
I like to be, around body language, like watching a person's body language.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I like to see person's body language, facial expression and whatnot. I mean, you can see that on Zoom, but it's not the same when you're in the room with the person.
Yeah.
It's like Hollywood Squares, It's all in to block, and you always think yourself anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of us, I think, during the past few years, we got very burnt out on Zoom. Yeah. And with that in mind, thank you all who joined through Zoom today because you're making a sacrifice. But it's
the next generation, Gen Z, is they're called Zoomers.
Zoomers. Yeah. So it's as Kula was saying, there are so many different layers to presence where you can be physically in front of someone and not be too present with them. Where someone's telling you about their situation, you're saying, yeah, right. Interesting, right? We could be in the same room and just not be present. And it may not. Whereas on the phone or in Zoom, you can be extremely present with someone if that's your intention, and if you're actively bringing yourself back again and again to, am I being present with this person? So we try to cultivate that presence because, as Kula said, there are definitely situations where you can't even find the words. And sometimes presence is the utmost thing that you can offer. Definitely in. Yeah.
So online, David said, most people seem to not be present even in person.
Yes. Often the case.
Wow,
There's a lot of
social media that's so great.
It is. Well, yeah.
Hey, where's the clicker?
Yes.
Where's the clicker?
So we may communicate more to someone actually with fewer words, but with invested presence. Yeah. They can feel when we're actually present. Sometimes like in trauma situations and things like that. Sometimes it just means sitting with someone and crying with them. Yeah, actually. Yeah. That may be all you can do in certain situations. There are no answers in circumstances. And sometimes people think, what's the answer? And sometimes I've had to say, I don't have an answer. Just be honest. Because a lot of these things are processes that we still are going through. We still have to go through. That's why I gave that exercise, right? That was the exercise. Presence is much more subtle. It's not just whether I'm in front of you or talking with you or holding your hands, or we just have a culture that's quite impersonal. So presence is a very, very powerful thing that we need to maybe think about. And that's, I think, part of what we're going to do here. So it's not just for traumatized people or people who are feeling pain. It's actually part of the everyday kind of interactions we must be having with each other. So
that being said, let's see what the next slide is because I can't remember. What's it? Oh, I think you got it. Okay. So establishing presence. This is the idea we establish chaplains, spiritual care providers who want to establish presence, or even just if you're not well. I'd like to think we're all essentially going to be spiritual care providers. So how do you establish presence? Do you establish presence when you're with someone? Sometimes we're like talking, they're talking to us, and our presence might be somewhere else. So as a caregiver, as a chaplain, there are three categories that I can see we establish presence. The caregiver can establish with the individual, the person. We establish presence with a family or community to a person, because sometimes they're disconnected. And we'll discuss it more later when we go through Anton Boysen, who's the founder of clinical pastoral education, pastoral care, how important the community plays a role. And then the presence, we want to try to establish presence with God and the person, the infinite, or the transcendent, and the person. So while presence can be achieved in large groups, which I think we want to discuss in a later session, for the purpose of pastoral care, we are trained in clinical, CPE is clinical pastoral education. It means to be present for another, to be present for another person, to be whatever their experience is, we are present with them. Again, because we can't necessarily have the answer, but we're present with them in this experience. So in a context, the spiritual caregiver gives themselves, navigates, and points out or nourishes this connection of presence.
Yes. So I'll just briefly add that there are times when we establish presence in the moment, and that may have lasting effects. And that's something that we aspire toward, that you can be present with someone in such a way that actually after you leave, there's still a feeling of presence. And, as Kulu was saying, these different types of presence that we're trying to establish. So for example, if you spend time with someone in such a way that they feel very seen while you're with them, it may have a theological implication for them. Maybe they didn't feel seen previously. They felt very isolated. And perhaps they felt isolated from the divine, for instance. And then you have an experience of speaking with someone where they feel very seen, and they feel that they are being heard, that they are cared for, that there is understanding there, right? So perhaps after we leave the room, they may begin to, in their own way, contemplate and connect certain dots in such a way that may spark their feeling more seen or more understood by God, right? Because they remember what it feels like to be heard and to be seen and to be understood.
And in the context of the hospital, I can't tell you how it just seems so personal, because you go and everybody walks in the room, everyone is asking you for something. Not we're taking blood, they're giving orders of what you're going to do. So when you come in and kind of establish, like, hi, how are you? What is happening? How are you feeling? What can I do for you? Not just kind of taking from a person. And so that's what we realized that spiritual care we did in the hospitals. But that's not just something for a hospital. How many times do we have in our community someone who's in the back of the room or hasn't been recognized or hasn't been seen? It means being seen, being recognized. Presence means like it has to do with like I exist, or the existence, their existence and identity of the person. So I know it just sometimes like, oh, just presence. We went in the room, we stayed there, but it really is. If you think about it, it's a very deep thing.
And you're really aware when you're with someone who's not present, it's really clear.
Yes. Yeah.
When you're trying to have a conversation, a deep conversation with someone and they're not present.
It can be quite frustrating. And someone who really loves you, even if they're gone, you still could feel their presence. Mm-hmm. That's like somebody who's established good presence, a ministry of presence. So I do know the next slide now. Yeah. It's going to be Anton Boysen. and it's a little wordy, but I'll explain a lot of it. Okay, so Anton Boysen is considered the father of clinical pastoral care. And in like 1996 or so, my teacher, my guru, had given a class called The Cure of Souls. It was like a 9-session seminar the cure of souls in our communities, in Vaishnava communities. And here are some quotes. I put some quotes here to kind of capture this idea, not just of presence, but what presence, trying to articulate what presence gives and what presence is addressing, which is ultimately isolation. So he says here, well, just briefly, Anton Boysen was a pastor, I think it was around the 1930s. And he went through a very serious mental crisis, and he ended up being committed. And while he was in this hospital, he did experience like a moment of clarity, and he felt he no longer needed to be committed. But he couldn't go, they wouldn't let him go because he was in a mental facility. So he took that time to observe the rest of the people who were there at the hospital also. And he saw a lot of similarities in their experience and his experience. And he saw a lot of what was mental health issues were actually spiritual health issues. So some of the things he says, so in those constructed transformations of the personality, which we recognize as religious experience, the individual is relieved of his sense of isolation. Now, isolation, he says, is the core essence of mental health issues. Feeling isolated, that no one hears you, no one sees you. You don't have contact, you're lost. And it's brought into harmony with that which is supreme in his hierarchy of loyalties, which is another important aspect of him, that everyone has people whom they want to be accepted by. There's a hierarchy of loyalties, he says. And he succeeds in effecting a synthesis between the crisis experience, which could be any trauma, and his subsequent life, which enables him to grow in the direction of inner unification and social adaptation on a basis conceived as universal. So there's some crisis that takes place, and then what happens is a balance between this being recognized, having one's identity, and finding acceptance from the people whom our loyalties are most connected to, who we want that approval from. Now, it could seem like, oh, I don't need approval from anybody. I'm an independent person. But Boysen and a lot of people acknowledge that we're social beings. We do have people whom we refer to, whether it's our parents or our teachers or our friends.
Yeah, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing about usually a person that even the sociopaths got somebody
Yeah.
they connect to. Psychopaths and sociopaths.
Yeah.
I never believed that. I used to think something was wrong. I ain't gonna say I never believed it. I always thought something was wrong with me because I was always looking for that connection. And over time I just had to realize that it is a sentient being's nature to want to connect to something.
Yes.
You can't just, like, I guess too rap music, you got too much rap music out here, like, all me,
Yeah.
Drake. I'm like, no, it's not all you. You got the engineer, okay, you might have too many words to take this word out. It's not all you, but that's just the image that
Right.
That's the image that we're through media and
Yes.
everything else that
We're indoctrinated.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, just do it all by yourself and you don't need anybody.
Right,
Yeah.
It makes you
individualism.
go crazy.
Yeah.
Trust me, I'm somebody that has been isolated for a very long time. It makes you go crazy.
Mhm.
Well, we're glad you're here now.
Yeah, so glad you're here.
Yes.
Yeah. I've seen, in AA program, this is the main thing I've never gotten used to. The damn noise, especially the silence. I supported somebody for Congress who's working on a law to have them turn it down. Anyway,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, just echoes are. Anyway, they say that most addiction personalities, it's a spiritual problem. In other words, most alcoholics are spiritually bereft. They're looking for spiritual release or acceptance or journey.
Yeah.
Some kind of spiritual life.
Mhm.
And alcohol is a quick fix for that. And
Yeah.
so are drugs. You want to feel like fall down.
You feel like you're talking to someone.
Yeah.
Yes, you are talking to somebody, you can remember the next day.
And, you know, going through the same thing, it's like, you know, there used to be a show on TV, Fridays, with the tape off on Saturday Night Live. There was a character on there, that a pharmacist, saying, oh, you depressed, anxious, too speedy, or happy, that's to take a pill. And, you know, you know, that's, in America particularly, that is the go-to solution for any kind
Yeah.
of spiritual malaise.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual malaise. People mistakenly think it's a physical or mental or psychological malaise.
Mhm.
It's not, it's a spiritual malaise.
Yeah.
You take a pill for it and they wonder why God didn't show it.
I think that there is a movement, like medicine, for example, hospitals are required to have pastoral care departments. The joint, the hospitals,
Spiritual care.
it is now required, and it's documented in the Joint Commission to say a hospital must take care of their patients
Is
spiritually.
that only in New York or is that?
No, that's all over. That's all over. Hospitals are required to have spiritual care departments.
Because I had to add to it, I've seen mental health facilities from both sides of the line.
Yeah.
I was a psychiatric attendant, a lot older, in my life, 1966, I was 3 years. I watched guys shave so they didn't open an artery. I
Mhm.
talked to parents, schizophrenics, I talked to depressives, some staff, you know, triple shift, you know, night shift, day shift. And then a couple of years later, I had a breakdown myself, and I was in voluntary hospital for around 6 months. And so I understand from the inside out what it does. It's a big and it's been a long, strange trip, is a great way to put it. And luckily I came out the other side of for sure.
No,
This time,
Wow,
Amazing, yeah, amazing.
you know, we're both almost at 70, and you know, it's like we're all just so kind of.
it's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I could probably talk about this, you know, I've gone through my challenges with drugs and whatnot. I've been in hospitals, AA meetings and whatnot. I really couldn't do like the full NA only because like I felt like as far as that spiritual part, it was more geared towards Christianity. And it's like, well, that's where a lot of my problems stems from. This is all my problem stems from. But you know, so you know, but I at least try to get something out of it, though, you know. So a lot of the stuff you said, you know, like you were saying about the spirituality, I get that. I get that totally because it's like when you don't have that spirituality, everything else falls apart. You have that spirituality, you're gonna have challenges, but you have that to hold you.
Yes.
Yes, support, foundation, something that goes deeper beyond the immediate circumstance into something that is more kind of eternal, lasting.
Yeah.
And you know, that's why now there is a recognition in the hospitals that they need to treat the full person. It's not just the physical or the mind, it's the entire person, right?
Because that's one of the things that we had talked about in a lot of those meetings is that, you know, a lot of what, you know, I hate to use the word, but we have to use the word addict. A lot of what our addicts do is, oh, okay, if I just make money and I'll be all right now. Well, no, now you got the money to go get the stuff. So whatever you're not dealing with, now you just got the money. We have a bad day. Oh, well, then the addict mindset is like something so like trigger, like, because we could be like, everything's going good. Well, hey, it's going good. It's all right. I can take that drink, or I can, you know, celebrate, you know?
Yes.
You know, it's a whole.
It's a big, it's a
It's
big
like
network.
nowadays, when somebody asks me what's happening, my answer is everything all the time.
Oh, wow. Like
And
that.
that's not around that, but, you know.
Well, what we're gonna do, we wanna go through a couple of like, they're tips, they're principles of pastoral care, which I think will be helpful. And then at the end, we're gonna do some like role playing and discussion about some of these topics and definitely some of our experiences. Yeah.
Just a little piece of feedback for those online, the comments aren't heard quite as much.
Okay.
So just be aware that, well, if there's a lot of commenting, there's nothing being heard online.
Thank you for letting us know, everyone, and apologize for that. Yeah, we will paraphrase, like, so if others are sharing, we'll paraphrase what they
Yes.
said.
Oh, yeah, we'll do that for the exercises. So let me just do a couple, this last one here. This is of Anton Boysen. It represents the love, this presence. It represents the love, the fellowship, which has the capacity for universality, and without which the individual cannot live. Whether we recognize it or not, we judge ourselves through the eyes of those whom we count most worthy of love and honor. Those whose composite impress is represented by our idea of God. And our hearts are restless until they find rest in that fellowship. So that's basically saying a lot of like these mental like difficulties have to do with a search for this universality, this presence, this connection, this relationship, this love.
Yes.
And in many ways, for those whom we seek that connection with, in some Boysen is saying they ultimately represent our idea of God or who God is. So that was kind of his deep kind of theological reflections about his experiences in the mental facility. So,
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly add, we see it in practice that, I work in a mental health facility, and there are people who the symptoms of the illness may still be there. That may take time to kind of, to be worked with in different ways. But when someone feels accepted, when someone is recognized for their gifts, when someone is approached in a loving, respectful way, it's incredible just to see the ways in which people really open up. And though the symptoms of the illness may be there and they may be struggling on some level, just their sense of being, their sense of personhood heals in such a beautiful way that they actually have the space, the confidence, and the facility to work on their recovery more. Because I think when we feel unacknowledged, or when we feel, as Boysen is saying here, when we're not in contact with that love, that composite impress of those who we care for, and really the touch of God in our life, we may just feel that we don't know whether to turn left or right. So yeah. Let's go.
okay, so well, we have a verse I think that we both will be working from. This is from the Upadeshamrita. This is a text written in the 16th century by one of our acharyas, our teachers, our historical teachers, Rupa Goswami. And we'll be going back to this again, but the text, I'll read the translation. This is how he says people in the community will interact with each other. This is how they should be. That means offering gifts. Dati means to give a gift, and pratigranati means to accept that gift. And so part of giving is also receiving. It's part of that dynamic. And then there is guyam, which means a secret, but it means to reveal in confidence something that's dear to you. Akyati prichati. Bhukti bojayate chaiva. That means accepting and giving sacred gifts. Like we have something called prasad when I'm also a priest, so we offer things in the morning, different times of the day, and sometimes the flowers. We call that, prasad, or food, or sweets, and things like that.
Is this Sanskrit?
This is Sanskrit, yes. And then this is what they define as sadvitam pritilakshanam. These are the 6 loving exchanges people will exchange, or people in the community exchange with each other. So this is kind of, this is something that we'll be going back to in different sections of our discussion. But I put it there in the middle. Yeah.
There was a question online, which I think went back to the slide before this. I just saw it, I'm sorry. It said, did you see your own level of presence increase or improve over time with focus?
Oh, that's very good.
Yes, wonderful question. Thank you. Yeah, I would say definitely, because in spiritual caregiving, we're also trained to be alert to our level of presence. So there are times where honestly we can feel, I mean, even just in the course of, ongoing service as a spiritual caregiver, you may have a day where you can feel it. You can say, you know what, I'm not really all here today. I'm not, or this conversation in the beginning, I was very present, and now I feel that kind of, trailing off a little bit. So in that way, we're kind of trained to have a dual presence where we're being present with the person in front of us, and we're also being present with what's happening internally within us. And it's interesting, it may seem counterintuitive, right? That if we're doing that, it decreases our presence with the other person if we have to monitor both of those things, but actually it really serves the interaction, because if we're attentive to that just as sort of like underlying another track, right? Then in that way, we can kind of alert ourselves, okay, I feel myself drifting a little bit, and I need to enter back into this. We need to have a fresh entry into this dialogue again, or I need to observe this person in a curious way, or I need to come back to our focus in the conversation. So to answer the question, there are definitely times where you can feel a difference in the level of presence, and also that with practice, this level of presence does increase, because you also find so many ways of observing and entering into the interaction that just capture your heart and mind. And that's what we want, actually. Ultimately, what we want on the platform of spiritual care is to find so many things to love about the people who are sitting in front of us. And in that way, that draws us very naturally into the interactions.
I think as a caregiver that there is, being aware of your level of presence, like what your capacity for presence being for other people, especially like whether you're a nurse or a doctor or a chaplain, because it's more of what you do, because you could be doing another occupation and be present for other people, but when your occupation or what your vocation is essentially presence has to be there. You really have to be aware of that. You also have to have other people, like the other chaplains, for example, in our department, we always touch base. How are you doing? How are you present today? And we have these things called grounding prayers that we say with each other, or before the day starts, just to kind of be aware of where we are at the moment. So I understand there could be, a bit of a capacity for presence, and sometimes you just have to say, I'm low in my energy for that today. I think to answer the question, it means you're more aware, being aware of how much you have to give. Because a lot of times, it could be a lot. And so you have to give yourself that time.
So one important aspect that I found mostly in the Western world is that there is certain kind of nervousness towards accepting even spiritual gifts. So irrespective of what the gift might be. Maybe because of the individualistic culture or whatever, I'm not sure. But again, because this instruction states about offering, receiving, the two-way, right? Two-way. So how do spiritual caregivers look at that perspective?
So what Rupesh is asking is that sometimes he said, particularly in the Western culture, we see that people may be nervous or hesitant about accepting gifts, even if those gifts are of a spiritual nature. So how then can we approach this, that actually we can learn more to accept gifts and to overcome some of this hesitation that's built upon the individualistic kind of culture?
The thing is, as far as gift giving is concerned, like, for example, sometimes people will, you can see someone like, oh, I just want to give you a gift, but you don't know them. You have to take the time to understand who they are. This verse, giving in charity, all of this, accepting this is from Priti, it's love. So it means, like, I know for example, like I know someone who is seeing someone, and the person was giving them these expensive gifts, but that person, they knew nothing about them, that they didn't come from a background of like expensive gifts. These weren't the things that they wanted. But the person kept on saying, oh, why won't you give me what, why don't you love me? Or why don't you give me more time? I'm giving you these gifts. And then it becomes, then gift giving is something different. It's being used as an instrument but the person didn't take the time to know the person, to say, this is what that person wants. So presence means recognition. Love means recognition. I see you for where you are, what you need, who you are. And so that when you give a gift in that context, then it makes sense.
I once visited my brother lives in Tunis, Tunisia, married a Tunisian, his store, but we were visiting and we went to his relative's house, his wife's relative's house. And I pointed out they had 3 little pyramids representing Giza, Egyptian pyramids of Giza. And I pointed, I said, I really like that, I love those, this is really nice. You know what? They said, take them. They gave them to me. I still have them on my mouth. They said, over there, if you point out something that you love or like, they feel obliged to give it to you.
Yeah.
And I've never encountered that. I mean, that's so counterintuitive. You know, America, how much is it?
Right, in America, it's like, oh, I'll sell it to you.
Yeah.
Like, yes, right.
Or they hold some kind of sentimental value out of it, it's not for sale.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's a beautiful example.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So we see that, gifts are given with love. So if we don't accept the gift, we're also kind of pulling away from the love a little bit.
That happened. Yeah, I was like, no, you don't have to, and they insisted. Right. That was like, that was insulting them not to take. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was so bizarre.
Yeah. And sometimes I just wanted to mention that sometimes the gifts are immaterial things also, right? So like, for example, like sometimes we just have to take the compliment. Someone wants to encourage us and give us love. And of course, in spiritual life, we're trying to culture humility. So it can be a little bit of a rocky road where we're trying to become humble, but at the same time, people are complimenting and encouraging us. But actually, what we learn from advanced teachers is that the humble position is actually to accept the compliment, but to take it as a blessing and to understand that whatever quality, whatever it is that someone's seeing in us, it's ultimately coming from our teachers and ultimately coming from Krishna. So in that way, we receive the compliment and we pray that we can move forward with developing ourselves.
See, I have a hard time with that. Like, I'm getting better with it. Like, somebody compliments me, I'm just like, oh, well, they don't know how much I'm disliked or from. If they knew the real me and they would be saying that. It's like, I just, probably have to stop myself. Okay, first off, you'll be present. You're not back home. You're here in New York. People are actually looking at what you're presenting, something positive. You're not where you're from, or people just want you to feel bad about yourself just to have control. And so I have to keep reminding myself that, okay, somebody says something good about you, thank you, accept it, and keep it going.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Insightful.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any, as far this verse, if you have any thoughts on that? I think the only thing is in relation to what Boysen had said earlier, that the community plays a large role. So this is kind of our mantra for our community, our relationships with the community. And so we'll expand that more on how it goes into like a sacred thing, a sacred relationship. Yes.
Yeah, and these are loving exchanges. They're always two-way streets. So we'll find ourselves on both sides of these exchanges. And what we focus upon in the context of spiritual care, although they're all very relevant, but we'll share a lot about revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially, just because that comes up quite a lot in practice of spiritual care.
Are you close to the Catholic tradition? Oh,
Yeah, I grew up Jewish tradition.
Jewish?
Yeah.
Oh, that's Jewish.
Yeah.
Backward to learn, sorry.
Yep.
Just, we can, if you had thoughts about that, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll share more about the journey, of course. Yeah.
So, okay, so this is one of the terms that we brought in the title of our session here is pramada. And so we talked about presence. And this is also a term that is, this is a term that's used many different parts of the philosophy, and especially with practices, pramada, it means negligence or neglect or inattentiveness. So we spent most, oh, I see. That's the battery.
If you want to move the table back,
We'll
you
just
can.
move the table slightly.
So we spent the first half of this speaking about presence, and I couldn't think of, there's this, not exactly absence is the opposite of presence, but more I felt was the idea of neglect or attentiveness. So here I note the difference between absence and neglect. Neglect or attentiveness means you can be physically present, but you're not present emotionally or spiritually, among other ways. So while absence can be considered the opposite of presence, negligence seems to be more accurate antithesis of presence. And pramada happens to play a big role in a lot of spiritual practices, which we'll look into in the next few slides. Because pramada plays a role in Buddhist and Hindu meditation practices. And we'll see here. So this is in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So this is, so if you see the Devanagari, it's actually very hard to read. It's very all connected. So I had to put these dashes to separate the words. Vidishyana, Samsaya, Pramada is there. Pramada, Alasya Virati, Bhranti, Darshana Labdha, Bhumika Va, Navasti Tavani, Chita Vikshepaste, Nataryaha.
You go with the pronunciation, I'm trying to pronounce it.
Well, anyway, I was learning Sanskrit just a couple semesters ago, and then they just give us this whole thing.
String.
And I have to figure out where's the word here? Where do you divide? So you have to learn.
Read that line.
You have to learn the rules, and then when you read more, you recognize where the words might end. It's always going to end like this. Yeah, you're going to have vowels at the end, oftentimes. So that's one indicator. But this lists sickness, incompetence, doubt, delusion is also sometimes translated as negligence, as pramada, sloth, non-abstention, erroneous conception, non-attachment of any yoga stage, and instability to stay in a yogic state. These distractions are the mind are impediments. So this actually, this is part of a section that deals with something called Ishwara Pranidhana, which means prayer or worship of Ishwara. So one of the recommendations of Patanjali in yoga is he recommends that one of your focuses could be Ishwara or God. So that could be a place where you could settle your mind when you're trying to do meditation. So, and then he says the word that's associated with Ishvara is Om. That's the second verse. So 123 says Ishvara Pranidhana. And then 124 says this is represented by the syllable Om, the sacred mantra Om. So then he starts explaining, well, what happens when you can focus on Om? And then he says, it removes the distractions, and these are the list of distractions. These are the list of the things. So
I always see Om connected with Om Mani Padma.
yeah.
What is the Mani Padma?
Well, it's a Buddhist mantra. I think it has to do with Avalokiteshvara, who's the goddess of compassion. Yeah, so do I. I think everybody has gotten one at some point. But
It's a walk through Chinatown for 20 years both ways. So.
Yeah, you see, it's written in Tibetan. It's a Pali or Tibetan mantra to goddess of compassion. So
I think this is just a little just comment on the Tibetan thing. This guy had gave me the name Tashi, right?
Yeah.
And I looked it up. It's Tibetan for appreciativeness and carefree.
Wow. So Richard was just sharing it, just for those online, that someone gave him a Tibetan name once. And
By accident.
But-
he didn't know that was Tibetan.
oh, okay.
But I'm like, oh, it sounds kind of Asian. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, yeah. So Chris is this good fortune. So
It's good fortune, carefree nature.
Yeah.
So here's another citation of pramada, and this is in the Padma Purana. And for maybe some people who are practicing devotees or Hare Krishnas, this is where we get the 10 offenses to the holy name in the Padma Purana. And I've only cited here the last part of that. I won't read the Sanskrit, but if you've ever lived in a temple in the morning, they'll read, you'll memorize the 10 offenses to the holy name, and then you also say that inattentiveness is also. We'll go into it more, but it says a person of low character who, in spite of hearing the glories of the name of God, remains devoid of affection for the name. So one thing to remember, I'll go into this, being immersed instead in the conceptions of I and my in regard to the body is also an offender against the name. So when you see yourself as the doer, or you see they have the ahamkara, the false ego, that I and me am doing this. And then he says, adi pramada. It's also an offense to be inattentive. Now, it may seem like that's just a supplemental thing, but we'll see in the next slide that some commentators see this as actually the source of all of the things that we might be offensive or distracted in our meditation. One thing I also want to say, because we were talking about presence with people, and I was speaking with my wife, and I said, well, I'm just trying to cognitively make sure this is smooth flowing, because I was talking about presence with people, and now I'm talking about prayer. Yeah. And she said, prayer is a relationship.
To what?
She said, prayer is relationship.
Oh, prayer.
Prayer is a relationship. So when we chant, when we're meditating, when we're saying all this, that is attempting to establish a relationship with the transcendent, with God. So this pramada has to do with our relationship with God and with everyone else.
Is saying that, hey, like prayer is talking to God.
Yes.
Mhm. Yes.
Meditation is listening.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's a two-way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the holy name, it's explained in our theology that the holy name of God actually is a person. That the name is not different from the personality of
Yeah,
God. So if we're neglectful of the name, it is like being present with a person. Yes, good point.
He who is, or I am what I am. They
Yeah.
did not want to give him Yahweh or anything. They didn't want to name God. It's limited.
So many names. Yeah.
So, thank you. So this is in a text called the Harinam Chintamani. Again, these are all some of these. The reason why some of you might not be familiar, this is spiritual care in general, but one of the things we are trying to do is try to see our scriptural or theological background and finding how it's relevant, how it connects. Not just to extend it, but to see how valuable some of the principles of Bhakti are in teaching or as we practice spiritual care. So just reading the English, some give up other offenses and constantly chant the name, that's chanting like the mantra, the name of Krishna, name of God, but still prema means love, for the name does not arise in them. So you could be chanting a prayer over and over again, but why is there no attachment to it? Why is no enlightenment coming from it? Why is no love for God coming from this? He says, I know now that the offense to the name known as pramada is impending the practice, the sadhana, and the attainment of prema bhakti. It's the inattentiveness. And he says that the original meaning of a pramada is inattention, and it's from this all other anarthas or all other
Unwanted things.
Yeah, all other negative things, unwanted things come from. So essentially something that's just inattention actually has a very profound effect on us, not just over time, just in the essence of who we are. But if you are practicing, you say whether you're doing meditation or you're chanting mantra, if you do that practice every day, and you think I've done all this for years, but inattentively, then where would you find yourself after years? That there could be a big, this could be, the fundamental issue that you find in terms of, we're talking
about the last line in Death of the Sales. Like the wife says, attention must be paid. And when he dies.
but that's pretty.
Sorry.
No,
So we just had a sharing that the last line in the salesman is attention must be paid.
Attention.
It's not because he's dying.
And there's
Okay, so there are three types of inattentiveness. I cite the verse here, but the three types of negligence or inattentiveness are audacinia, indifference, jadya, laziness or dullness, and vikshepa, distraction. So if you think of like the different ways we've been inattentive, whether it was like, trying to do meditation and scrolling through your phone, that's distracted.
Yeah.
And then indifference, like I'm doing this practice, but I don't know if it's going to do anything. You don't actually believe in the process, you're indifferent to it. But maybe you do it because, like you say, Catholic, I go to church on Sunday. I was indifferent to it, like the prayers that they did. But there's a great, even though it's a history of theology that could be transformative, I'm indifferent because I don't know I just don't know the history. I don't know the theology. You're not connected to it. You're not present for it. You're in it, so you're therefore inattentive.
Yeah, I mean, Christ and Reformation, reference that.
Right.
Just
It became just a bunch of empty practices. You were paying, you were doing tithings so that you could get out of hell or something like that. But that's not what the original practice was.
Tom Bishop, he's when I was a kid, when Bishop speak, all I heard was walk. When I asked him what Bishop said, I'm like, I don't know. He's like, man, do you even be here when
Right.
He just said that the bishop sounded like Charlie Brown. Yeah, Charlie Brown voices. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't.
I might catch on one or two things because it was funny, but other than that, I was like, man, I was just mad. I was in church. I was missing Pokemon.
Okay, so those are the three types, or an analysis of inattentiveness. These are the three, found three aspects or three types that there could be.
Sometimes a combination, right?
Yeah, or a combination. So pramada may mean madness, but here the meaning is inattention or carelessness. It is from this offense that all offenses spring. The wise men recognize these three types of inattention: indifference or no attention, laziness, and distraction or attraction to other objects. So the idea that prayer, the idea that meditation has to be very intentional, very present. This is like the relationship with the transcendent. So anyway, these are just examples. I won't go into that too much. Well, I'm not going to, but it's there. So this is just kind of summarizing this idea of bhakti and presence. So I go back to Anton Boysen's statement he made earlier. Represents love, this fellowship, the capacity of universality, without which the individual cannot live. They cannot exist. Whether we recognize it or not, we judge ourselves through the eyes of those whom we count most worthy of love and honor. Those whose composite impress is represented by our idea of God. And our hearts are restless until they find rest in that fellowship, in that connection. So we have also here this is a quote from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is from the biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so just the translation here. Pure love of God for Krishna is eternally established in the hearts of all living entities. It's not something to be gained from another source. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, the living entity naturally awakens. So, yeah, right.
No, you're right.
Oh, sorry. But the idea is that within us, that relationship which we are looking for, that we cannot find, is actually our nature, to find it in that relationship with God and others through our understanding of our relationship with God. There is an idea of a community. Say there's this term sangha, which you may have heard in Buddhism. Sangha literally means like an anga is a limb. Sangha, when you think of a community, everybody is a limb or part of one being. But then there's satsanga, which is a term, and that means there's satsanga and asatsanga. Satsanga means like eternal community, like real, the true community, because these are the people that you are connecting to, that are speaking about things that are most important to the spirit, to the soul, not just about the things in the world. Asatsanga are the things of the world that maybe we have to do out of obligation, but it's not dealing with aspects of the soul or the eternality of the soul, or understanding the soul, or understanding the truth.
Did that correspond to what the Buddhist call
Highest perfect enlightenment. Nirvana is
samadhi?
samadhi is a term also used
I
in,
mean, is that?
well, from the aspect of bhakti. Bhakti means that there is a personal relationship with God, a personal God also. Nirvana would mean near vana, means like there is like a negation, or there's a nothingness, essentially.
Well, but I thought you were talking about the personal relationship with the world, with everything all the time. You know, I mean, that seems to me to be the goal, the similar goal.
There is, but there's the relationship also, as Anton Huygens is saying, that in these people, we also see our relationship with God. And that relationship with God is a very personal connection with the God who also has personhood.
Well, that would seem to separate God from people. God is out there, people are there.
Well, I mean, theologically, you have a transcendent God. We might say transcendent is there, but then there's also a theology of immanent God, God in the world.
Yeah.
So God does exist in the world,
In us.
with everybody in different aspects of the world. God exists because he's supposed to be absolute, all present. So
The kind of the idea of the guy with the white beard in the sky is just gone. Right?
well, maybe for some.
Nobody does that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have a lot of, old Catholic patients who I see, and, I think that might still be a concept.
It's easily visualized, I guess.
I think, and generally, when we have the idea of God, I imagine that we're all on the same round table, all having a discussion of God. But when we go home in that personal relationship, that deeper practice, it's a very, very personal aspect. Like when I work with other chaplains and they go home, like the pastors, I see how much they love Jesus, and I'm like, oh man, they really love Jesus. I wish I loved Jesus like that. But then I was like, oh wait, no, but I love Krishna. I have my path, and my path is very rich also. So it's
I was confused my whole life about that. The experience of God is an emotion or a perception or both. So,
well,
Yeah, that's some interesting philosophical questions coming up, whether experience of God is an emotion or a perception. That's what was being brought up here. Just wanted to share with the people online.
yeah, just, I mean, it's kind of like 6 of one, half dozen the other. It's kind of, and it seems to me, it's all seems to be both. It's all seems to be somehow a merging or coming together of both those ideas, both those feelings, or both those perceptions.
Yeah, it's a joining of those two. And from a bhakti perspective, what I could say is we have this understanding that from perceiving God, from hearing about God, from understanding more the qualities, the nature, the personality of God, that emotions arise from that experience. So if we perceive more and more, just like with a person, also with a person like Kula, for example, like if I get to know more about him, if I get to understand more about him, that will lead me to feel things. So the more we can perceive of the qualities, names, forms, qualities, and activities of God, that allows emotions to arise within us. But going back to our topic, it requires attention. Because if we don't hear about it with attention, it won't bring anything.
The irony of that whole situation is the emotion distraction from the actual permanent, all knowing, all being, all perception. In other words, once we start weeping or feeling our heart pound or getting emotional about our search or our discovery or thinking of God, that very feeling is distracted from the search, from the actual journey toward God.
Well, yeah,
The Bhakti
yeah, the
tradition.
Bhakti path gives space for the emotions.
Different paths, of course. And so when you, when you speak about
one moment path.
yeah, but the idea is that from the Bhakti tradition, because it is a tradition of love for God,
Yeah.
that there is a pure emotionality for God. That because of, if your perception, for example, perception,
Which accompanies.
they can, some people, like philosophically, they say that perhaps our senses aren't accurate. So they could be flawed. So we see something wrong. So when we have this kind of presence and the practice, it's supposed to clarify those senses so that we see things as they are,
No, my favorite quote.
or feel things as.
My favorite philosophical quote, Werner Heisenberg, in the 30s or 40s, he became a physicist. And he says, he studied the universe his whole life. He said, the universe is probably not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine. We're not able to imagine how strange it is.
Right.
So that kind of, that stopped me in tracks. It always does. It's kind of like, so, have another beer, have another cigarette,
Right.
eat more food, have a tub of ice cream, it doesn't matter. But, I mean, it's just, it's kind of like belief in spite of evidence of God, in spite of, everything.
Yeah.
That distracts.
I think that, again, from the Bhakti perspective, from the perspective of devotion, because there is a lot of philosophical discussion, and most of the philosophies, if you study them enough, like Advaita Vedanta, or even our own Achintya Veda, but Advaita Vedanta will say that the truth is ultimately a nirvachaniya, that meaning in Sanskrit, meaning we can't speak about it because we can't have the words to describe these things. And then in our tradition, we have Achintya Veda, meaning like we can't think about it. It's hard to conceive.
It's impossible.
But the point,
Our little fish brain is not big enough.
but that's the idea that there's a limitation of cognitive understanding. Even though we could come close to that understanding, there is an idea, and this comes out through a lot of Bhakti poetry, that some things are conveyed, as you're saying, emotionally. That Bhakti conveys truths that can't be philosophically, like devotion, poetry, beauty, love, convey truths that can't be simply understood through philosophy.
My first 6 months in AA, I cried like a baby at the meeting. And people say, why are you crying? I say, sometimes there's no other response appropriate to the state of the world, or my state in the world. It just, that's where it went. And and people would always comfort me. And
I think too, we live in a society too where, as far as men, it's kind of looked down upon for us to show our emotions. And, after a while, you can only do that for so long until it manifests itself in negative ways. So that's why you getting all that negative emotion, allowing yourself to feel instead of be a man, be a man, be a man.
Right. So Rich is speaking about the importance of sharing emotions, of showing them honestly, even though maybe even some gender roles lead us to feel that we need to suppress our emotions and so on and so forth. So it's a very good point, yeah. Because who are we hurting by suppressing those things, right? We're hurting ourselves, we're hurting our journey a lot.
which is ferment.
And I think that's why it's important too to have a good spiritual community, because if, you know, if you don't have those people, you can really voice that too, you know.
That's such a good point.
Because I used to voice mine to the wrong people. Yeah, crying too much, you know.
Right. People who are not in this position to really receive it. Yeah, that goes back to these 6 loving exchanges. We have to be able to share matters of the heart in confidence with people who are going to inquire confidentially, people who care, and people who are able to receive that truth. That's a really good point. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, spiritual community has to have that quality that, you know, we're able to share honestly and openly about what we're going through. And that's also a strong principle of spiritual care, that as spiritual caregivers, we want to be that presence for people.
So just in conclusion, just this last about presence. I tried to put just a preliminary, again, like there hasn't really been, as far as like spiritual care, there has been a lot of work done in other traditions like Christianity and Buddhism, but in Hinduism and in Bhakti in particular, it's still forming, it's still developing. So a lot of what we're doing, I've never actually personally myself seen discussed. So again, this is something that could be discussed, corrected, or, you know, if there's a critique. But this, I have written here a type of ministry of presence from a Gaudiya Vaishnava theology, which is a Bhakti theology, very, very, in some sense, a very pure sense of Bhakti, where Bhakti is like the only way to know a thing. Like devotion and love is the only way that we could possibly know a thing. So that's the idea. Presence here is a personalism that consists of an exchange of communication or simply actions, or even more simply being present, not necessarily using either words or actions. That present is not just sangha, or connection, but satsanga, in that it seeks to connect on a deeper, truer level of relationship, a level of the spirit. It is the care of the spirit. This care of the spirit recognizes the inherent relationship between God and his creation, which is ultimately love, and seeks to establish presence to draw attention to, navigate, and or engage in this true loving relationship between a person, their community, the world, and Krishna or God. So I put that there.
Great.
Okay. This is also comes with it's again. We'll go into the next.
Okay, so we'll enter into just a few of the practical applications. And this is a bit of a review from our first seminar that we had, but we wanted to share it because it's very relevant to this principle in Bhakti of sravanam, of hearing. And that's what we're going to speak about. We'll speak about the spiritual foundation of listening, but we'll start by talking about the importance of listening in spiritual care. So listening is an essential pillar of any spiritual care encounter. As spiritual caregivers, we spend far more time listening than speaking. This is a misperception that people sometimes have about spiritual care, that we're going to go in and we're going to drop knowledge and we're going to really lay something on someone. You know, we're going to crack the book open, whatever book it might be, and just unleash something. Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that. Yeah, for sure. Like, you know, just wanting to, you know, when you're something that you're inspired about, it just kind of bubbles up within you and you just want to offer it to somebody, right? But spiritual care means that we're actually spending time with someone, listening to them, understanding what it is that they're going through, what it is that inspires them, what it is that terrifies them, what it is that uplifts them, all of these different aspects of the person. And then in that way, there can be a sort of spiritual dialogue that unfolds very naturally, but it's on that person's terms, actually. So we spend a lot more time listening than speaking. Because, you know, as Kula was saying, a lot of the time, presence is actually the best thing that we can offer, allowing someone to feel heard, seen, understood. And a lot of the time in the course of that kind of dialogue, if we're really listening, people actually sometimes answer their own questions. It's a really beautiful thing to see, right? Yeah. Yeah, maybe we've had experiences like this, where if someone just has the space to talk and share, all of a sudden, whatever question they were carrying with them going into the dialogue, they very beautifully, because Krishna says that he gives us intelligence from within, he illuminates us, right? He's there as Paramatma, he's there within our heart as the super soul. So when we have these kind of dialogues where that heart is kind of open a little bit, as you were saying, Richard, like we don't have to be on guard, we can share, then all of a sudden, a lot of knowledge and a lot of understanding can dawn, you know, in that way by Krishna's grace. So we kind of understand that speech helps us to affirm our listening. So it's not that I'm going to be completely silent like a monk, you know, but that really it's more about listening. And then when we speak, we use that to affirm, I'm with you, I'm listening to you. So repeating things back, summarizing what we've heard, and maybe offering some insights here and there to help move the dialogue forward. So we're going to look into this. So this kind of listening is termed active listening. So it underlines the fact that, you know, effective listening is far from a passive process, right? So listening, we may say, okay, I'm not the one talking, I'm just going to be silent, so I can just check out, you know. It's not like that at all. Actually, in order to be a good listener, we have to be very active. So we have to affirm again and again our presence with the person. It should be that, you know, each sentence that the person says, we're bringing ourselves back. We're having these kind of miniature interactions, you know, within each kind of sector of the conversation. And the active process, so this is a definition that came from healthcarechaplaincy.org. It's nice, summarizes. This active process demands that we first grasp what the person means and then communicate this to them, right? So a lot of how often do we feel we've poured our heart out to someone, but we feel that we weren't heard, or maybe they didn't understand. So what active listening does is it gives that person the assurance of, I hear you, I get it, I understand. And if we don't get it, it's also okay. You can express your curiosity, because that also shows the person, this person really wants to know. This person really wants to understand.
So what active listening, what you're supposed to do is, as a person is talking, you try to rephrase what they said back to them.
Yes.
I read up on it before. So.
Yeah, that's a key principle, to rephrase what the person said. So that's really helpful, because it helps them actually to process too. Because sometimes when we're just speaking it, we're not hearing. So when they hear it back, it's very good. And it also, again, just shows that person, I've heard what you said, right?
Yeah,
So
it was one of their little signs of law. It says, learn to listen and listen to learn. It's very big.
Learn to listen.
They say, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. So don't talk, listen.
Beautiful.
It took me 5 years to learn.
Oh,
Of the 13 years I got.
and we also have to keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk
Thank you for sharing them. So this communication of what we've heard is known as reflective listening. So active listening is that act of entering again and again into the conversation, reaffirming, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Within ourselves too, am I listening? Am I with this person? Am I really hearing? Am I really feeling? Right? So that's active listening. But when we share back to the person to show them that we're with them, that's reflective listening. We're reflecting back. So just a few principles here. So some important elements of active listening, you all summarized it for the most part, but I'll just, nonverbal communication. So our body language, facial expression, eye contact, right? So if someone's telling me something very important and I'm like this, right? They're not going to feel heard at all, right? And of course, that's an exaggeration, but it can be a subtle thing too. Right? I'm looking around, checking the time, whatever it might be. There are so many ways.
My first therapist is because
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Yeah. He was just saying that his first therapist was not attentive and sometimes fall asleep. Yeah. So establishing presence, being focused, not interrupting, right? So we do want to share insights here and there or reflect back, but we wait for the moment in the dialogue when that door opens. Not that we're kind of cutting someone off midway, because that's also showing them that we have some agenda, we have something we want to share, that we can't even wait to hear them out. Like, okay, that's something really on the tip of my tongue that I want to say to you, right? The roles get reversed and it can be difficult for the interaction.
wanna go ahead and say it, so I don't, you know, I don't forget, because if I don't go ahead and say it, I'm gonna forget it, then, you know. I don't know why I think like that, it's like if I don't go ahead and say it, it's just gonna kill the conversation.
Yeah,
It's
sometimes.
gonna kill the conversation, interrupting it just to say it.
Yeah, so I understand. Sometimes you don't want to lose your point and everything like that, but
Sometimes you have to just say it. Yeah. So-
And sometimes you just gotta be like,
sometimes you just gotta let it
Sometimes,
go. And to trust that if this is a very important point, it will come up again.
Yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
and the conversation will go in that direction.
In the flow of the dialogue, the right things will emerge. And also asking clarifying questions when it's truly necessary, not for the sake of just making conversation. Someone tells you they're from Chicago and you're like, oh, so you're from Chicago. Like it's that sometimes we do just to kind of keep the ball rolling on the conversation. But when it's really necessary, you know, ask clarifying questions, and even to say to someone, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you were saying, but I really want to. Can you please just share that again? You know, so it shows the person you're really with them. Reflective listening. So again, emotional presence and connection, paraphrasing, right? And summarizing, sometimes giving the words, right? So if someone says to you, you know, ever since this happened to me, my life is just out of control. I walk out the door, I'm walking the same way I always walk, but I feel lost. I feel like I don't know where I am. I feel like everyone around me is changing. I just feel so strange in my life right now. Someone says something like that, and maybe you can offer them a word. You can say, that sounds very bewildering. It sounds like you're having, you know, such a bewildering experience. And sometimes people really appreciate just having words that summarize the circumstance. They'll say, yes, that is bewildering. And again, they feel more understood, and it actually helps them to tell their own story. So attention to detail, remembering names, remembering places if we can. Continued affirmation of listening, you know, so nodding, sharing, showing again and again, I'm with you. I'm not gone yet, you know, and reflecting the feelings. So just to share a spiritual principle here, this is one of the key principles of the Bhakti practice. So we have 9 processes of Bhakti, which we're going to get into that. But the first of those that's given by Prahlad Maharaj is sravanam, which means hearing. So this is a quote from our teacher, Srila Prabhupada. He's sharing. He says, so the most important item is sravanam. The most important item is sravanam, or hearing. If you do not do anything else, if you simply sincerely hear about God, then gradually you will be God conscious. That is also true in the material science. The students go to the school, college, and hear from the professor, and gradually he becomes learned in that subject matter. Especially in this age, sravanam, or hearing, is very, very important. We have got many sense organs, out of which the oral sense, or the hearing sense, is very important. Therefore, for spiritual understanding, we have to use this ear. So therefore, the Vedic literature is called Shruti. Shruti means to receive the knowledge by hearing. So that's from a lecture in Caracas in 1975. So Prabhupada is very beautifully summarizing the importance of hearing, how essential it is. And he says here, not only in spiritual life, but even materially speaking, if we're not hearing, we're not going to gather anything. So what we're trying to do in spiritual care and in our own spiritual lives is to become better listeners. Because in spiritual care, by hearing, we can establish presence, as Kula beautifully said, and also that we are learning more, we're gathering more. Otherwise, we're not fully there. So in the same way, Shravanam Kirtanam. So we'll go into this, but Kirtanam means to chant. So in our chanting, we're also trying to hear. We want to hear the name. We want to hear the holy name. We want to hear the spiritual knowledge. And if we're not listening, it's like, it's compared sometimes to like soil. If the poor quality soil is there, even if you have a perfectly good seed and you put it in the poor quality soil, it won't grow. So in that way, by our hearing, we're trying to establish a fertile environment for spiritual knowledge to blossom. And same with our interactions with others. If we're hearing, then that conversation can really unfold in a way that's beneficial for everybody. So Parikshit Maharaj. So we have a text called Srimad Bhagavatam. It's also called Bhagavat Purana. And there's a great king named Parikshit Maharaj. And he finds out that he has only a very short time, practically a week, 10 days left to live. So what does he decide to do? Because he's a very pious king, he's actually a very advanced person. He decides that he wants to sit with the sage and hear spiritual knowledge for for the remainder of his life. So he's celebrated in our tradition as one of the best exemplars of someone who practices sravanam, hearing, right? So he sat on the riverbank with a sage and he listened to so much spiritual knowledge. And he listened, he was receptive. He asked questions, but only when necessary, and he wanted to really receive. So we can find inspiration in a personality like Parikshit Maharaj as a great exemplar of hearing. So we'll share here. Here we have the 9 processes of bhakti. Okay. So this is spoken by Sri Prahlad Maharaj. So Shravanam Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Parasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. So these are the 9 processes of bhakti. So the translation of this verse, Prahlad Maharaj said, hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with the body, mind, and words. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. One who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. So this is really the full landscape of one's spiritual path. But what Prabhupada is emphasizing here, like the quote that we just read, it starts here with Shravanam. The term is there. Shravanam, it's the first of the 9 processes. And if we're not hearing, the door can't really open, right? So it begins with hearing. And so this is really an important point in our spiritual lives, that we're trying to be receptive through hearing. So as we're trying to practice as spiritual caregivers, we're also developing listening, shravanam, hearing ability, or the desire to hear in our own spiritual journey. So this is, we're trying to draw these lines here now, connect these dots, because the art of listening is something that's very sacred. It helps us to be there for others more, but it also helps us to be present with God. It helps us to be present with the knowledge and all of the mercy that's entering our life. Otherwise, if we're not hearing, we don't stand. Of course, mercy is unstoppable, right? If it's coming our way, it's coming our way. We can't deny it, right? But at the same time, if we're receptive, then things will be all the better, right? So we try to aspire to hear. And Srila Prabhupada himself, his teacher, praised him. He said he likes to hear. He likes to listen. So these are our key principles here. And I just want to give space for Kula. You have any additional thoughts?
No, I think that was, these are 2 general principles of spiritual presence and listening. I think they're both very, well, they're very interactive, presence and listening. When you do reflective listening, my pastoral care teacher said this is like it's an incredible skill to have. Like you were saying, if you listen enough, the person will give their own answer to their question, or sometimes just to be able to articulate what's inside, and you have to bring it out, and you can see it. Now you can see it and hear it. You can have a little bit of relief that not only can you articulate it, but someone's heard it. And so it has like this axiomatic thing. It's very powerful listening.
Yeah, and there's something very powerful about sometimes being a sort of third party, which we are as chaplains. We enter into a situation where we're not family members, we're not personally kind of involved in the circumstance. And as spiritual caregivers in the community, you can also be that. We may have relationships with each other. Of course, we need to. That's what we want in spiritual community. We want relationships. But at the same time, sometimes just being there for someone as someone who's a little bit removed from the situation. Not only can we offer a different kind of perspective, but also it just becomes simple for someone to share. They can share more openly without as much baggage or confusion. I just remember in the hospital environment very strongly that, there were times where it felt so good to kind of be just, like you can say, like just an outsider or just a chaplain, whatever it is, where someone will share something. Oh, I didn't want to tell my son this because I was worried that it was going to hurt his feelings, but I really need to get this off my chest, something that I'm going through. And then someone will share something. So if we can be that sort of non-judgmental presence for each other, it's very, very powerful.
So it's like that's a common complaint among, people that are isolated or live alone. They say like 3/4 of America lives in single life.
3/4 of America lives alone.
Not maybe not that.
Mhm.
A lot of people just always.
Yeah, loneliness is a huge.
And the main complaint you get when we talk to these people, it's like, nobody listens. When I met my wife, I met her in an art, it's a long story, but I met her in an art gallery, I took her out for coffee afterwards, and she talked up the street, and I just sat there.
Yeah,
And she
she
said,
listened.
her family was one of these small, can't get over it edgewise, Jewish mother families,
Uh-huh.
And nobody ever listened to it. So she said, what set her up with me, what made her come back, and we finally, 40 years ago, got together, was I listened. I was the first person almost in her life that had listened to her.
Yeah.
Man, where these women at, man? Because when I talk to them now, I have it's like pulling teeth trying to get them to talk. I'm not used to women that don't talk. You can tell everything, then I start getting defensive, like, why you want me to tell everything about myself? You ain't talking about yourself.
Right.
We're not playing this game.
Reciprocation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes back to the comment that David on Zoom made, where he said, it's so rare in this day and age to find anyone who seems to be listening.
Yeah.
And it's incredible.
Talking to little brother.
Yeah.
1984 was Big Brother, now it's Little Brother.
Pocket. Yeah.
Everybody's
But
watching. Everybody's watching.
But it's really incredible the way that, when someone discerns that we are listening, when they see that we are listening, I'm sure you've all experienced it because you're obviously all interested in listening. Like sometimes you may have a conversation with someone in a store or something like that, and people are almost like in shock if they see that you're listening. They feel, oh, wow, this person hasn't walked away. They haven't interrupted me.
What did I say that they heard that I didn't want them to hear me? Through the walls.
And it's very soothing to the soul, actually, when someone sees that someone's just listening with them.
Yeah, I think it's just too much technology, People become so disconnected. I noticed that, if they're not talking to you on text, after a while I was getting on my nerves, people sitting there sending me messages on Facebook. I'm like, bro, why don't you just call me? Oh, man.
Yeah, technology changes things.
I used to do all that practice stuff after a while. I'm not doing all this right now.
Mhm.
I can't do it.
You call somebody, you leave a message, they never get back to you. You text them, they get back in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't check my voicemail. I'm not even gonna lie about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
want to
changed.
set up and all that. A lot of times I just call them back. What did you want?
Yeah, right, just call. Yeah, the young generation, I read something, I forget where, but the very young generation, they're actually afraid of phone calls. They're afraid to some degree of phone. It's very intimidating. It's very nerve-wracking.
I also heard they're taking everything very slowly. They're taking it much slower. I'm a mover. We took everything all at once, all the time. And, nowadays kids are like going slow.
I mean, they're a little paralyzed because there's so much information. Like when they're younger, you had to search for information to learn about something. But now you have everything right there at the click of a button.
And then for me, now I can talk on the phone a little bit better. I used to be scared of talking because, not to put down my mother or anything, because me and my mom's relationship has gotten a lot better because doing healthcare, I started understanding what she went through taking care of me. I'm like, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm like, man, if I could go back in time and help you kick my own butt, I would. But my mom, she grew up, they grew up so hard, you spilled the milk. By the time my grandfather got done with you're gonna be scared to spill that milk. You're gonna be just like that. So when I would answer the phone, kid don't know. Who is this? I'm like, so I used to be scared after a while. I don't know the phone Then she'd be yelling at me for not saying nothing. You gonna say anything? I'm like, but you already got no phone.
Yes.
But now like, we're getting out of that. I'm like, okay, she's still alive. Oh yeah. Thank God she's still alive. Yeah. I'm like, if it wasn't for her, I would still just give a little bit back on Brown said I was in the home health care. So I finally had chose a career because I'm not gonna lie, I was just in that moment. But the person I was doing home health care for, not to put them down because of course when I met them, I had my own toxicity. So of course, somebody toxic is gonna attract somebody toxic. So, we living together, but after a while, it was kind of like, as I'm taking care of her, it started becoming more and more stressful. And I'm not talking about the normal things, like I could deal with doctor vision, I could deal with a person getting hurt. It's when like, I would try to tell her, hey, don't have certain people around, don't do certain things because, so the way you're talking and stuff. And after a while, I just couldn't take it anymore because I'm just like, okay, you know what? This person is just so used to living like this that this is all they know, this is all they want to know. And it was destroying me mentally. It was to the point where I would get up and I would go like days without even talking. Like this lady would just be talking with me, just like, what I'm saying? I would just stop listening to her because I didn't know when she's going to be mad about something. She's one of those type of people when she gets mad, then everything that she's holding in about you, she starts telling you all at once. And you're dealing with somebody with self-esteem issues. I can't, it's one thing if, okay, I'm at work and I got to deal with somebody. That's different because okay, I have to go home and forget what she said. But I'm working at home with you and I got to hear that all the time. After a while, I'm like, I ain't even started talking like, okay, you get mad now, okay, I stopped doing X, Y, and Z. It's like to the point where why even try? You're getting, it was just so difficult. And then, and I know a lot of it was manifestations of, things that she was going through. She would have so much stuff to where she couldn't even find her stuff. And, it went to a whole, but long story short, I had to, I was like, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Yeah.
And even though I'm going through a difficult situation now, with the difficulties I'm going through, it's nothing compared to what I was doing.
Yeah. It sounds like you did the right thing by listening to yourself, like what is this bringing up in me? And also, that burnout or compassion fatigue, they use these terms. These things are very common when you're like a caregiver. Sometimes you just feel like you have nothing left to give. So we try to practice self-care.
That's why if I do it again, I think I have to do it like a facility setting where I could eventually go home.
Right, yeah. And I can't imagine, 24 hours.
I'm only working 25 hours. I'm with her 24/7.
Yeah.
And then
my wife's mother is 97, and 2 weeks she'll be 97. And she's in rehab now, she broke her hip, she fell on the night, broke her hip, and my wife is literally in what you're describing every day, uptown, downtown, very, very many in the rehab center. She was in Presbyterian Hospital in the ER for 2 weeks. And she's got partial dementia, she has really bad memory. She called 5 times a night, like something she just asked her 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I really feel for my wife. It's kind of, finally, I just had to kind of put our relationship on hold because, or just give her all the support I could and just kind of stay out of it and, not make disparaging comments about, I keep telling you, take care of yourself a little bit. You're taking care of everybody else but yourself. It's like you gotta take care of yourself. Along with, whatever care situation you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Her mother obviously, she's like a little child and she can't get out of bed. She calls every half hour to get the nurses to take her to the bathroom. She's 97.
Yeah.
And, we'll both my wife and I are all 70, so we're like, oh, we got this to look forward to, Yeah, and, she, and my sister was the same way with my parents when they went You know, she lived up in Colorado, my mother was in Utah, so she just flew over to Los Angeles every day. You know, helping her mother's in while she passed. You know, it's just, Betty Davis had a great quote about it, which I've been quoting probably too much lately, but Betty Davis said, old age is no place for resistance. And it's just like, you can't be like delicate minded or body or personality when you're trying to age gracefully. You know, and in some ways, there's just no such thing as age gracefully. Just, that's one of my big issues. For myself and my mother and my wife's mother, obviously. She could die tonight. She's like that. But,
Thank you for sharing that.
I think too, depending on what kind of background you come from too, I think it's hard for your wife too, because like even like the way I'm using myself as an example, you know, I found myself a lot putting my wants and needs on the back burner for other people because they taught that, especially I came from a single parent household. So it was kind of on me to kind of like, you know, help out and stuff. And so I noticed in relationships, I always felt like I had to sacrifice what I wanted or needed to make that person happy. I'm realizing that is very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Very, very unhealthy. People will take advantage of these things like that.
well, it's like the old expression, like on an airplane, they say, please adjust your own oxygen mask before you have
Yes,
the first.
yeah, it's a
If you pass out when you're trying to get it.
you have to do. Yeah, it's a tough one to put into practice, you know, especially for those of us who are helpers, who like to be helpers. You know, just for the people online, we've been sharing about the challenges of caring for others, and then we forget to care for ourselves. You know, we forget to care for ourselves. So this old, you know, analogy of you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, because what that ultimately does is not a selfish thing. If we actually want to serve in a sustainable way, it makes our service sustainable. Otherwise, yeah, you can do a great job helping somebody, and then, you know, so.
I mean, my wife, you know, she just, and then when she's home, she's always on her phone, kind of texting people, but there's a kind of a double, triple whammy with her, because there's other stuff involved too. I never first got hit by a school bus, and the Upper East Side and killed.
Who was it? Was
What?
Who was it?
Who is what?
You said something about the school bus.
Oh, her cousin, who was in her 80s, got run over by a school bus and killed on the other side. So there's a huge lawsuit about it. There's a huge estate involved. So she's involved with lawyers and finance and this and that. Plus her mother, plus
She's got a lot more.
she's in a union with the tour guide. So, you know, I just kind of come home and you know, I tell people, young people thinking about that together, they say, how'd you last 40 years? I said, you know what the key to the situation is? We leave each other alone. I go to the fire, she said, on the couch, and, you know, but she's like the saint.
So a real good person. Yeah. Hold on to her. Well,
I have. So far,
just keep on, don't tire.
Yeah, it is inspiring to hear about the 40-year relationship. It's incredible.
So we can barely make fast forward.
Yeah, it's, if you told me that 41 years ago, I sit there plumb
So we just want to give a little space if anyone has any questions or comments from Zoom.
Or anyone else in the room?
For anyone else in the room, yeah, please, any thoughts at all? Yeah, Rupesh Ji.
So, I guess, the first slide that we went to, Saint Antonio of Assisi, right? Speaking about, old days, if we can go back to the slide quickly.
About one should preach constantly and use words only if necessary, that? Or take that, yeah.
Old age and wisdom and foxhole soldier in the foxhole.
Oh, about presence,
Oh, yes, oh, the definition of presence.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
With or without words, to be the vehicle of God's love when they enter the room of a dying patient, the cell of a prisoner, the cubicle of an employee, or the foxhole of a frightened soldier.
Yeah, interesting, just before this class, I was just thinking, the thought process, the phobia that people have towards being near or being present near a person who is passing away, or meeting a person in a prison. I mean, these are quite interesting societal situations. But again, coming back, and it might sound very maybe on these, there is a certain phobia attached to being present in those circumstances. That's
Yeah,
not the case, thankfully, in the West. People are more connected. People don't think so much of. I don't think there's some phobia kind of. It's more like, okay, do I
it's
want to-
there, it's there, it's definitely there.
it's there. Maybe a little less so, but it's there for sure.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you
So,
said.
so Rupesh is saying that, there's a phobia that we find in terms of being present in difficult situations with people. So he's like using these examples of being in a prison or being someone's dying at the end of life or a foxhole, military, right? So he's saying there's a lot of phobia around being present with people, even if it's not happening to us. To be with so say, I had a friend who was in a very, very difficult situation. Just even sitting with them, sometimes we're afraid, we don't know what to say, we don't know what to do. So there is a phobia. Yes, thank you, Rupesh.
This is the old saying that I always think about when you mention foxholes, is the old saying, there are no atheists in a foxhole.
No atheists in foxhole.
No
Right,
atheists in the
right.
No.
Was that a question?
Yeah.
You're in the 60s, you
I guess-
35, 30.
So Rupesh just wanted to wrap up his thought here, yes.
So how do we kind of reduce that gap in overall, how do we kind of build that presence when there's certain amount of stigma or phobia, or whatever you might call it, is attached to that? Because even to get not just spiritual care, but even to get caretakers to really handle such scenarios, unless they are like medical professionals or doctors, it's very difficult when it's home care or something like that.
Yes, so Rupesh is asking, how can we kind of close this gap where, the phobia is not as strong in caring for people in very difficult, challenging, frightening situations?
It's phobia or taboo.
Yeah, taboo.
My thoughts are that I always say to family that they are actually the best suited caregiver for their loved one. It's true because you could have nurses, you could have home health aides, but no one knows them or has that patience or has that relationship to take care of them. So a lot of times that's the first part, that your loved ones are the caretakers. The second part is most people, they'll confront it, but not to the level that a person at a hospital, a nurse or doctor, they see it every day. So some people choose that life, that vocation, that calling, but most people will only see these whether it's prison or hospital or ER, they'll only see a few times in their life.
Yeah, so I would just briefly add that I think an important key here is personalism. So we discuss in Bhakti philosophy, personalism, to see everyone as an individual and to not have this kind of shallow view of someone. You want to actually enter more deeply into a connection with someone. And what I found personally is that when we get to know somebody, even if it's in one of these very frightening, difficult situations, very uncomfortable situation, you find that actually all of a sudden the connection becomes very warm and very real. And whatever frightening things are happening or whatever sad or difficult things are happening in the background, they're contextualized. Not that they go away, they're still there. And we don't want them to go away. Actually, sometimes that's an error we can make as spiritual caregivers. You want to pull the whole sun into the room and brighten up the situation and say, oh, there's nothing to be upset about at all. That's also not the right thing to do because we negate what the person's going through. But there's a warmth in interaction. When we have warm interactions with people, all of a sudden, the situation just becomes that much more human, that much more approachable, that much more real. It ceases to be theoretical. So it's not, oh, I'm in a prison and it's very scary. It's I'm talking with this person right now and we're sharing this. and it may happen to be in a, right? So it's like the interaction is what becomes the focal point rather than the whole scene. And, you know, another part of reducing that phobia is just doing it and remembering that we're not actually going to hurt the person. Sometimes we make it so much about us. Like, I want to say the perfect thing to someone who's having a difficult time. I don't want to say the wrong thing. But generally speaking, of course, we have guidelines and we have to be kind of careful, but generally speaking, you're not going to make the person's situation worse by trying to love them and trying to offer them a caring presence. So generally speaking, you know, within reason, you're not going to make matters worse. So sometimes we need to assure ourselves of that in order to just give it a try and enter into a circumstance and try to be caring. So
it feels like people who are very, really great medical expertise, like nurses and doctors, or the people who are really empowered spiritually, caregivers and stuff, can really handle the situations effectively, but not the people in the interim, the middle, who may not be empowered spiritually that much. Might still have that possibility of stigma or whatever that.
Yeah.
Non-gender, so the generic, unless they're empowered spiritually or really
No, I mean, you'd be surprised to see, there are a lot more spiritual people in the medical environment. There are, but there's a lot of people, you know, even at where I am, you know, we used to say prayers before every meeting. Somebody made a complaint, and so we don't have prayers anymore. So there's a lot of people who have more of a rational view of this, of science and existence. And so, yeah, you know, there's different thoughts about how things are.
please.
Yeah, just kind of as a follow-up to that previous conversation about all these kinds of phobias and trying to engage in their active listening. Sometimes I also find that your judgment can also be kind of standing in the way, giving that compassion and love to the person who is need that, you know, like someone who can listen him or her to. Maybe as a like professional like caretaker or spiritual caretaker, like, or like you guys are trained to remove that judgment based on your personal experience or like religion or whatever your belief is from those situations. But have you ever like felt those challenges standing in the way since you have like do it? That's, I mean, yeah, I'm just curious.
What a beautiful question, because thank you so much, because what you're talking about.
What did you want to?
Oh yeah, let's repeat. Yeah, for those online. So the question was basically, and let me know if I got it right. The question is how in these difficult situations of trying to offer care to people, do we ever feel our own personal judgments come up? And if so, how do we get around that? And how do we kind of balance it? Yeah. So this in spiritual care terms is known as countertransference and transference. So basically, sometimes we see someone according to something that happened to us in our life. Okay, I'm talking to this person, I'm trying to care for them, but they remind me of my cousin, who I have a lot of difficult feelings around or something like that. And how is that affecting me, right? So am I feeling some resentment toward this person? And in the moment, am I able to identify why? And maybe sometimes that's part of the training. Maybe I can say, oh yeah, this person reminds me a lot of my cousin or someone I was in a relationship with, whatever it is. And that can work on both sides. It can manifest in the form of judgment and kind of pulling away from someone, or it can manifest in some difficult way of like becoming quite attached to somebody or having kind of too much of like an investment in the interaction. So we try to be aware of those things, and it may not be that we're above the judgment, right? So the judgment may still come. We're human beings, and we have a lot of, the Sanskrit term is samskaras. We have a lot of deep impressions from our own life that may influence the way that we're kind of interacting with people. But in our training, at least, we're trying to become more aware of that, to recognize it in the moment so that we can either kind of try to shuffle it out of the way so that it's not hurting the interaction. Or even sometimes, once in a while, you can use it constructively. Sometimes you can use it constructively. I'll just give one example. Like, so say, for example, I'm having an interaction with someone who's at the end of their life, and they're reminding me of my friend who passed away, something like that, right? So we don't want to become overly emotionally wrapped up in it. That can be a harmful thing, but you can remember a little bit the way that you felt when your friend was passing, and we can use that to bring some compassion up in the heart. Of course, we already have a lot of compassion for the person who we're connecting with, because these people who we're caring for are wonderful, right? But at the same time, you may tap into some of those feelings and recognize them. See, if they're not recognized, that's when it gets very complicated.
Yeah.
If we recognize them, then you can say, okay, I'm feeling this, and it's reminding me of my friend, but I just want to tap into that feeling so that I can be there for this person who, as they are. But I remember my feeling, and it's with me right now, and I want to offer it. Yeah.
Does it affect you out of curiosity in a negative way, no matter how much you try to engage in that active listening? It's just either that the message just doesn't get across, or like the other person just like, there's no way for this person to feel any better. Despite how much you are in it and investing in it and trying to express that love and compassion. And if so, please share some details.
These are such great questions. So this question was, is it ever the case that there's a frustration or a difficulty that despite how actively we're present with someone as spiritual caregivers, that they're just really unable to receive that, right? Right? And things are not changing, the conversation doesn't move. Is that right?
Yeah.
So even
Cool,
said feel better, which is interesting.
Yeah, oh yeah, right, but they're not feeling better. They're not feeling better, yeah. So that's it. Who would you want to speak to that? Yeah.
My wife is kind of, she's just, when she comes home, she's so tired and so exhausted by the caregiving with her mother and with the situation with her dead cousin and so on. And she's lost people in her family too, like aunts, uncles, father. So, but she just sits there, and I don't know why I did this, but I said, you know what, you just don't seem to feel pleasure, any kind of joy in living. You just don't, there's a term called
Anhedonia, yeah.
which is inability to experience pleasure. And I kind of brought that up, I think, this morning. I don't know exactly when, but my short-term memory is shot too. But it's and I just I knew I shouldn't say it, but then again I thought it might possibly open something up in her, like spring her awareness into. I need to do something for myself. Her, I talk about her. She needs to relax and enjoy her own life rather than monitoring and trying to fix everybody else.
Yeah.
So I mean, and therapists, as you do as therapists, must experience that a lot. Kind of that where I just recently got back into therapy. Wonderful woman. She senior later this week after 3 weeks vacation. And it's a fine line. I mean, it's that sometimes I don't know if you ever watched Ingmar Bergman's Persona. Okay, don't. Just don't, because it's about two women that their identities become kind of confused and merge and rust. But I mean, that's a super question she asked.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, it's kind of like, it's the oxygen mask again. It's if you're not confident yourself, I'm not happy, more or less, reasonably happy that psychoanalysis says a reasonable acceptance of the imperfection of the world. you're gonna be useless. You're gonna make the situation worse both for yourself. So, I just thought that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you, the way you illustrated the way it can happen and play out in real life. And cool. Yeah, so going back to the question.
I mean, just looking at the type of chaplaincies that we have done, for example, like I was at the hospital and I'd see people, they come in and they go. And there's only a short window of time that we could be present. Dina works in a mental facility, he sees the same people.
Very long-term relationships.
And
And
now
people are there for years.
I'm in doing hospice and I see people for this period of time, this very crucial period of time where they're going to pass away in a short amount of time. So really that presence is going to be, according to the circumstance you're in. And in your circumstance, it's maybe just not, you're gonna say something like maybe it's anhedonia. And then she'll respond to it, but then there's gonna be more day after day. Care for the caregiver is a huge thing that's neglected. Like in the hospital, we care for patients. We give a lot to the staff, the nurses and doctors. They come to our office, they ask for prayer. There is a lot of stress on caregivers. It's day after day, and they need respite sometimes. They need someone like you to say, hey, I'm here. I'm here to hear what you're going through. I'm here to be with you. I'm here to even question you. Are you taking care of yourself? So these are the things, like, depending if you say, like, you've tried and you've tried, that's really all you're going to be able to do depending on the circumstances. There's a lot of people in the hospital that I gave care to and they get discharged and I don't know where they are anymore. And we can contact them, but really our duty legally is done after they've been discharged. But in his line of work, he's going to be day after day working with the same people, and a lot of times with very, very little change of behavior or anything.
Yeah, because this is kind of like you can say like the hospital, it's in New Jersey for kind of people who are living with extremely, extremely severe, like acute mental illness, chronic, so it's kind of people who have been hospitalized short term and things are not moving. And they end up in, this facility where they're getting more long-term treatment. And so there are a lot of ups and downs, but as Paul was saying, sometimes there are just long periods where people are not.
Schizophrenia and stuff.
Yeah.
But like in the 70s, and mid to late 70s and 80s, they emptied a lot of those chronic
They sure
patients
did,
were put
yeah.
out on the street. So
Yeah.
it's like, what are they supposed to do? And it's a sticky wicket.
Yeah, it's very complicated. It is. And, sometimes the most we can do is to really get to know people, to spend time with them, to have relationship, to have connection. And, going back to, it's very, and thank you for bringing that up, Rajarani, about that you mentioned feeling better, right? That people are not feeling better. But of course, deep in the core of our hearts, we want people to feel better. We want people to be happy. We want people to have, beautiful lives.
Well, and
But
better
it's-
for them, maybe not the same better for you.
Absolutely.
That's
So
the gist of that question.
So it's on a relative scale, and also sometimes there's a very nice analogy that's given in our spiritual care training that we don't necessarily want to reach into the deep, dark well and pull someone out. It usually doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is actually sometimes we have to climb in with that person and sit next to them and have an exchange according to what they're going through. So it may not be in the conventional sense that someone feels better, but maybe they'll say, oh my God, my family, they're pushing me to feel better. My friends, my partner, they all want me to feel better. And I just feel so guilty talking to them because I'm not better. And I can't even talk to them anymore because I know how much I'm disappointing them.
Yeah.
But you came and you talked to me and I didn't have to be better. I could speak to you in terms of how I am right now. And then the secret of that is actually at the end of an interaction with them. Most people will, and it may not be in the classic sense, like you said, but in their own way, they do feel some positivity because they were accepted for their circumstance.
Acknowledged.
And that way they don't feel isolated or by themselves.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
know that there's someone next to them or keeping them company.
Yes.
Yes. So that people aren't running screaming when they hear what they're really going through, right?
Yeah, sometimes that push for like, I want you to be better is isolating. I want you to be better, I want you to be better.
Absolutely, yeah, it can be, well, what's wrong? Yeah, why isn't this better? You know, like, you mean I can get better than that? You know, it becomes a kind of conundrum, like a game.
It's progression.
Funny, I was thinking about this relationship I was in, and it was like my first like real serious relationship. So I finally let my guard down and was like telling her how I felt and everything. And then like she was just like, you know, you telling me all this, man, you know, make me like not as attracted to you, this and that. Long story short, I started cheating on her right after. Because I just felt like, well, hey, I can't talk to you about nothing. I gotta always act like everything's hunky dory and stuff. Like you know, your emotional crap on me all the time, and you know. And I sit there and try to listen as much as possible and get advice. I will say one thing: I realize where I go wrong. I'm the dude that wants to bring the sunshine in.
Yeah.
It's like, man, if you just do this and this and this and that, and I'm starting to realize, okay, a person could misinterpret what I'm saying, thinking I'm just like, I'm Mr. Got all the answers and stuff, and you know, I'm just like, no, I just look at things I do wrong and tell you to do the opposite.
Right, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, definitely the most valuable relationships, either as caregivers, as spiritual caregivers, or even our own personal life. It seems like the best relationships are those where we can actually just be who we are in the moment, whatever the circumstance is. Here I am. This is it. And then people can accept us in that way, and we can accept people in that way. So we are actually at our time, and we really wanted to do actually a role-playing exercise, but we're going to have to save that for our next session, because then we can put some of these tools, active listening, reflective listening, into practice. But what I just encourage everyone, including those online, is to try to put these things into practice. Many situations will come up. So just try to see yourself listening actively to people in your life, and maybe offer them some reflective listening. Try to summarize the circumstance. Let them know you're with them.
Is this session always on Tuesdays?
So no, the session will be, these sessions are once a month, like in spiritual care. Dean and I have, well, we'll determine, it's not gonna be Mondays, actually, it's a special, usually it's Saturdays.
Usually Saturdays.
Yeah, so we have, what's that, same time though, 3 to 5, but not every Saturday, once a month.
So I'll just look on the site and see what's up.
Yeah, you look online, and then also Dean and I have office hours every Sunday. We're here from, was it 11 to 2?
11:30 to 2. 11:30 to 2.
We have spiritual care office hours.
We keep open hours.
Yeah.
Cool, on Sunday.
On Sunday, correct.
Yeah, I'm like, well, I mean, I'm like going to that one over in Brooklyn.